11 months old. That's how young Brooke Shields was when her mother signed her first modeling contract. By 12, she appeared nude in a major film, and the director called it art. By 15, her image was selling millions in denim, and the industry called it fashion. The exploitation of Brooke Shields wasn't a Hollywood scandal. It was a Hollywood system, one built from the very beginning by the person who was supposed to protect her most. Teresa Anna Lillian Schmann, known to the world as Terry Shields, grew up in Newark, New Jersey, the daughter of a house cleaner and a bus driver. Her childhood, marked by struggle and ambition, shaped the way she would approach motherhood. After a brief marriage to Frank Shields, a scion of East Coast privilege, Terry found herself alone with an infant daughter in Manhattan. She saw in Brooke's beauty not just a blessing, but a passport out of working-class obscurity. Before Brooke could walk, Terry had already begun constructing a business around her. At 11 months old, Brooke appeared in a National Ivory soap commercial, her first modeling contract, signed through Ford Models. Terry did not just sign as a mother, she became the architect of every deal, forming Brooke Shields and Company, a company that gave her legal authority to negotiate, collect payments, and license her daughter's image. The arrangement was direct, maternal, and absolute. Every contract required Terry's signature. Every paycheck flowed through her hands. New York's child performer laws demanded a trust account, the Coogan account, where a portion of Brooke's earnings would be locked away until adulthood. But the rest, routed through management fees and licensing deals, remained under Terry's control. Ford Models took their commission, and Terry's company claimed a manager's cut, a structure that blurred the line between protection and profit. By the time Brooke was 5, she had already appeared in dozens of ads and print campaigns, from Jell-O to department store catalogs. Her image sold and resold across America. Terry's methods were relentless. She screened scripts, negotiated for top billing, and insisted on full creative control, often clashing with agents and editors who questioned her demands. Industry insiders described her as both a shield and a gatekeeper, driven by fear, pride, and the certainty that the world would not hand her daughter anything for free. Brooke, meanwhile, became a product before she became a person, her childhood measured in contracts and royalties. The mother-daughter bond fused maternal love with business necessity, creating a system where family and commerce were inseparable. This business framework, built on legal loopholes and parental authority, would soon enable something far more controversial: the transformation of a child into a symbol and the justification of art and fashion as defenses for what came next. When Louis Malle cast Brooke Shields in Pretty Baby, the line between art and exploitation was not just blurred, it was redrawn. The film's script demanded nudity from an 11-year-old, justified by the claim of historical accuracy. Paramount studio lawyers crafted a contract that included a single-take rule for any nude scene, a clause meant to limit exposure, but also to shield the production from legal blowback. Terry Shields, as sole guardian and business manager, signed off on every detail. Her signature on the bathtub scene contract became both a legal green light and an ethical flashpoint. Malle, already known for controversy, insisted that the film was a necessary confrontation with America's sexual history. He argued that casting a real child was essential to avoid what he called a sanitized lie. Critics and studio executives echoed his language, flooding press kits with talk of authenticity and European sensibility. The word art was their shield, wielded in interviews and legal filings alike. But behind the rhetoric, the reality was raw. Brooke, still a child, was asked to perform scenes she could not fully comprehend, her body becoming a site of adult debate. The public response was immediate and ferocious. Parents' groups filed complaints with the New York District Attorney, citing child exploitation statutes. In England, the British Board of Film Classification demanded edits to the infamous bathtub sequence, and local authorities in Manchester launched their own investigation under the Children and Young Persons Act. Studio memos reveal executives scrambling to justify the film's content, emphasizing the presence of a guardian and the supposed educational value of the production. Yet these defenses only deepen the divide: art against alarm, profit against protection. As Pretty Baby premiered at Cannes in May 1978, international headlines questioned whether the pursuit of art could ever excuse the commodification of a child. Brooke's image, once the property of a mother's ambition, now belonged to a global controversy. The industry's willingness to invoke art as a shield set a pattern that would echo through the next decade as Hollywood tested and repeatedly crossed the boundaries of what society would tolerate. On a remote stretch of Fiji in January 1980, cameras rolled on a set that would soon become the center of a global experiment in commercializing adolescent sexuality. The Blue Lagoon, starring a 14-year-old Brooke Shields, was shot far from union eyes and American labor inspectors. Production logs confirm a grueling 12-week schedule, with Shields under contract for 40 hours a week. The film's premise, a boy and girl marooned alone, coming of age in isolation, leaned on the allure of innocence colliding with sexuality, a formula calculated for maximum impact. Regulatory boundaries were tested, then quietly sidestepped. The original U.S. release carried an R rating citing sexual content and nudity, but the marketing machine spun controversy into currency. Headlines about the film's provocative scenes and Shields' age generated a wave of free publicity. When the film entered the home video market in the 1990s, edited versions were labeled PG-13, broadening its reach and extending its profit life long after the initial uproar faded. The numbers tell a stark story. On a modest $6 million budget, The Blue Lagoon grossed $58 million worldwide. Studio ledgers show that the film's box office performance was not an outlier, but a proof of concept. Sensationalism sold. The more the public debated the ethics of the film, the more tickets were sold. Producers and marketers took note. The boundaries of taste, law, and childhood itself could be stretched as long as the result was lucrative. The system's incentives were clear. The Blue Lagoon's success didn't just reward risk-taking, it set a commercial standard. The industry had discovered that controversy was not a liability, but an asset to be engineered. The next logical step would be to apply this formula beyond film into the world of advertising, where the commodification of innocence would become even more profitable and even harder to regulate. In the fall of 1980, a single television commercial cut through the static of prime time and ignited a national debate. Brooke Shields, 15 years old, sat cross-legged in a pair of tight Calvin Klein jeans and asked, with practiced innocence, "You want to know what comes between me and my Calvins? Nothing." The line was delivered without a hint of irony, yet the message was unmistakable to adult viewers. The campaign's creative brief, archived at the Fashion Institute of Technology, spelled out the intent: fuse youthful freshness with a knowing sensuality and let the ambiguity drive conversation. For Calvin Klein, controversy was not a risk, it was a currency. Agency ledgers show that Klein's team poured $850,000 into national media buys, targeting the most watched network slots. Nielsen data tracked a 13.4 share for the spot, and within 4 weeks, Calvin Klein's men's underwear sales jumped by 12%. The numbers confirmed what the creative directors suspected. The more the public talked, the more jeans sold. Letters to the Federal Trade Commission poured in from parents and advocacy groups, accusing the company of sexualizing a minor. Yet the outcry only amplified the brand's reach. Each network ban by ABC, CBS, and NBC became another headline, another round of free publicity. Inside the agency, the language of art and modernity masked the mechanics of profit. Internal memos describe Brooke as the embodiment of American youth, while storyboards instructed her to pose with a blank, open gaze, projecting innocence while inviting adult interpretation. The disconnect was deliberate. Brooke, still a teenager, understood her job was to look natural, not to grasp the innuendo layered into every frame. She later recalled that she wore no long underwear beneath the jeans, a detail that seemed trivial to her but titillated the adult audience the campaign truly targeted. The campaign's success sent a clear signal to Madison Avenue. Provocation could be engineered, outrage could be monetized, and the boundaries of childhood were malleable if the returns justified the risk. Brooke's image, already blurred by the ambitions of others, became a test case for how far an industry could push before society pushed back. As the backlash grew, government agencies began to take notice, and the pressure that started in the living rooms of America soon landed Brooke in the halls of Congress, forced to answer for choices she never truly made. On June 26, 1981, the halls of Congress echoed with a question rarely asked of a 16-year-old. What does it mean to be the face of a national controversy? Brooke Shields sat before the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, her childhood already dissected by strangers, and now her adolescence subjected to public interrogation. Lawmakers pressed her about the Calvin Klein campaign, about Pretty Baby, about the blurred line between innocence and provocation. The official transcript records her voice steady, insisting she saw herself as a clean-cut girl. But the subtext was impossible to miss. Brooke, a teenager, was being asked to account for the choices of adults who had shaped her image and profited from the uproar. The hearing played out as a spectacle. Reporters circled, cameras flashed, and the committee's questions, ostensibly about advertising and child protection, landed with the force of accusation. Brooke's answers, measured and careful, did little to stem the tide. Headlines the next morning splashed her testimony across the country, framing her not just as a witness, but as evidence in a larger debate over the commercialization of children. The pressure did not end with the gavel. On campus, the scrutiny followed her. Princeton University, where Brooke enrolled in 1983, became another arena for public consumption. Campus journalists and national outlets alike tracked her every move, publishing stories that speculated about her classes, her friends, her very right to privacy. In September 1985, the Harvard Crimson published her GPA 3.8 without her consent. The story triggered a national conversation about student privacy and the boundaries of fame. The American Association of University Professors condemned the act, citing the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, but the damage was already done. Brooke's academic life, meant to be a sanctuary from the spotlight, became another front in the battle over her autonomy. The personal cost of being a symbol was steep. Brooke Shields was no longer just a person. She was a case study, a headline, a policy argument. The world debated her image, her intellect, her very identity, rarely pausing to ask how it felt to live under that microscope. These years of relentless scrutiny would become the crucible that forged her later resolve. The public, the press, and the institutions that claimed to protect children had all, in their own way, made her vulnerability part of the national conversation. In the fall of 1996, Brooke Shields stepped onto a new kind of stage. The sitcom Suddenly Susan premiered on NBC, drawing nearly 25 million viewers to its debut episode. For the first time in decades, headlines described her not as a cautionary tale or a symbol, but as a comedic force, someone in command of her own punchlines. Critics who once dissected her childhood now praised her timing and wit. The Los Angeles Times called her a revelation in a role that lets her be funny, flawed, and finally adult. This was not the Brooke Shields the world had come to expect. Gone were the calculated poses and the manufactured innocence. Instead, she played Susan Keene, a woman rebuilding her life after breaking free from a controlling relationship. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Behind the scenes, Shields negotiated for creative input, shaping storylines that mirrored her own struggle for independence. Her presence in the writer's room was more than symbolic. It was strategic, a way to reclaim authorship over her public image. Suddenly, Susan ran for 4 seasons, earning steady ratings and syndication deals. For Shields, the show was more than a career move. It was a declaration, The girl who had been marketed, managed, and misunderstood could now define herself on her own terms. Comedy became her armor, and for the first time, the laughter belonged to her. After the birth of her daughter Rowan in 2003, Brooke Shields faced a darkness she had never known. Postpartum depression crept in, relentless and suffocating, shattering the image of the smiling Hollywood mother. The pain was not just private. In 2005, Shields described her struggle in the memoir Down Came the Rain, laying bare the sleepless nights, the intrusive thoughts, the sense of drowning, while everyone expected gratitude and joy. The press, always hungry for a new angle, seized on her honesty. The real storm broke when Tom Cruise, then at the height of his fame, condemned her use of antidepressants on national television. He called psychiatry a sham, dismissed her suffering as weakness, and accused her of endangering her child. For weeks, headlines pitted Hollywood against medicine, celebrity against science, mother against mother. Shields refused to stay silent. In a blistering New York Times op-ed, she wrote, "When a mother is told that the medication that saved her life is a sin, the sin is the system that silences her suffering. She refused to apologize for seeking help or for surviving." The public clash forced a reckoning with the stigma that surrounds women's mental health, especially when the world expects perfection. Shields became an advocate, speaking at medical conferences, joining campaigns for postpartum screening, and testifying before Congress. The woman who had spent her childhood as a commodity, spoken for by others, now demanded the right to define her own story. The urgency to reclaim authorship was no longer just personal, it was political, and it would drive her next chapter. In 2014, Brooke Shields published her memoir, There Was a Little Girl, and for the first time, the story belonged to her alone. The book did not soften the chaos of her childhood or the sharp edges of her mother's ambition. It confronted the contradictions head-on: gratitude and grief, love and resentment, the cost of being both a daughter and a product. With each page, Shields reclaimed moments that others had packaged and sold, describing not just what happened, but how it felt to live inside a life so thoroughly managed, scrutinized, and misunderstood. Nearly a decade later, in 2023, she stepped in front of the camera again, not as a muse or a child star, but as the author of her own legacy. The documentary Pretty Baby, Brooke Shields premiered to critical acclaim, placing her voice at the center of the narrative. For the first time, industry insiders, former friends, and Shields herself examined the machinery that had shaped her image and the culture that excused it. The film did not just revisit the old controversies, it interrogated them, giving Shields the space to name the harm and to claim the survival. Publishers and filmmakers now sought her perspective, not just her likeness. The child who once had no say in the contracts that defined her life now wrote the terms of her own story. Through memoir and documentary, Brooke Shields achieved what the industry had always denied her: final narrative control. Her journey from silence to authorship stands as a testament to endurance and to the power of reclaiming a voice that was, for too long, spoken over. Today, the entertainment industry still profits from blurred boundaries, with minors driving billion-dollar platforms, often without real agency. Parental ambition can still collide with protection, and the language of art continues to excuse what should shock us. Brooke Shields' battle for her own voice exposes a question that won't go away. Who protects the child when innocence is currency? Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.